And then let's see, looks like we are recording. So I want to thank everybody so much for joining us today. I think, I'm not exactly sure who's with us in person. They're the fire company, but with the folks online, I know a lot of you were folks that I had the pleasure of meeting this week in our input sessions. And I am really excited to share with you the recommendations and ideas that we had coming out of this week. And we've got a lot of stuff to cover with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share with you everything that we've got, and then we'll have an opportunity at the end to kind of open it up for some questions and thoughts and that kind of thing. But, without further ado, let me jump right in. And I want to talk a little bit about the process first. Those of you that maybe don't know exactly how we kind of came with this, several weeks ago, I was able to come to Middleville. I spoke with the DDA board. I believe that was on March 16th. Was able to spend a couple of days in the community, just kind of seeing it for myself and being on the ground, taking some photos and kind of seeing the place. And then from there, we went and we've launched a community survey. We went through and made that available to folks, got a pretty good turnout on that survey, and I'll cover some of those results in just a moment. And then for the past 3 days, we've been in the middle of this input charrette, and that's kind of a fancy design term for that simply means working frantically. And so we started on Tuesday morning, and we had a series of meetings, 9 o'clock, noon, 2, 4, and 6:30 on Tuesday, and then another 8:30 on Wednesday. And then everything that you're going to see today essentially has been created since that 8:30 a.m. meeting concluded yesterday. So about a day and a half to kind of pull all these ideas together. And this really is that kind of first reaction to how everything starts to come together. And before we jump into the visuals, I just want to share some of the things that we learned about the community and some of the things that we discovered in the process. I'm a big history guy, so I like to dig in deep and learn as much as I can about the community. One of the things that was interesting was some of the historic publications we were able to find in reference to Middleville. This is a pretty interesting combined map of Eaton and Berry counties with kind of detailed jurisdiction maps of the communities that make those up. One of the other things that I really like to look at is what are called Sanborn maps. If you're unfamiliar with these, Sanborn was an insurance company that would send cartographers to the communities every couple of years. And what they would do is they would go through and they'd draw all your building footprints and how the buildings were constructed, what they were used for, give us little details like, did you have any steam or hand pump fire engines, and where your prevailing winds. The entire exercise really was one in, what's it going to cost to ensure this community against the potential for fire and complete destruction. So this is a map from 1893 of Middleville. We see that your population in 1893 was about 900 people. And then this next map jumps forward to 1934. Population actually dropped 100 down to 800, but you see a tremendous amount of growth in terms of buildings. And so again, all these things just give us a really nice kind of historic context. We're able to see a little bit better how the community developed with this kind of main corridor of Grand Rapids Street and how it kind of developed towards the river from the east, where now so many people experience it from the first time on M37 and then travel east to get to the river. So it's kind of a different entry sequence. And again, all of those things are things that we kind of have to think about and consider as we learn about how the community works. Now, from there, I told you we did this survey. Couple quick highlights out of the survey. Overwhelming majority of the respondents were either live in Middleville or they live and work in Middleville. So, not a whole lot from tourism. That's fine. Don't necessarily expect that. We did have a higher than normal turnout from other, and that other was alumni of the school who have moved away. So they don't live here anymore, but they still love Middleville. So kind of an interesting thing to dig into. Now, this next chart, this can be a little complicated. So let me see if I can explain it for everybody. This is a sliding scale. And I asked the respondents a series of questions like, do you think Middleville is known throughout the state of Michigan? Do you think that Middleville is known throughout the nation? And when you see oranges, the dark oranges strongly agree, the light oranges agree, the kind of gray is neutral, the kind of light teal is disagree, and the darker teal is strongly disagree. So the thing that was really, really interesting was the community very much saw itself as flying under the radar. They did not feel like they were particularly well known throughout the state and certainly throughout the nation. And that's what those two bars are. And that's why you see so much of that teal in those first two bars. But look at what happens in that third bar. Is Middleville a great place to live? Not a single negative answer. So I think that what we're finding is overwhelmingly positive. Also understanding that awareness is not particularly high. And the only category here where you do start to see a little bit more teal creep back in is whether or not the community has great opportunities for shopping. And this was something that folks said they really wanted more of. They wanted more shopping and retail opportunities in the community. And then the second category here was restaurants. So of course, communities always would like to have more options of where to eat, but overwhelmingly positive, and I think shows us a lot of insight about the community. Now, one of the other comments that we heard over and over again was that the community was a bedroom community. Now, I hear this phrase quite often as I work with communities across the country, and this immediately makes me want to jump in and learn a little bit more. So I wanted to dig into your demographics and some of your trends. I use a couple different sources for this, but estimated population in the jurisdiction now is somewhere around 3,400. Poverty rate 5.16, median household income 62, and median property value about 120,000, with number of employees in the municipality at 1780. So again, these numbers, it's difficult to get numbers that are always spot on, accurate, but they give you a range. You have to kind of treat it with a little bit of voodoo. One of the numbers that really jumped out to me was median age, 30. That is unbelievably young. Like remarkably young. And I think that young median age is very, very telling. It reinforces all of the anecdotal stories we heard about how people are being drawn here for the schools. They're being drawn here because they have kids. And the percentage of homeowners and kind of school-oriented mindset has been growing. Now, this next chart kind of blew my mind. Median household income. Since 2017, mid-year 2016, so over the past 5 years, you have gone from essentially being completely and totally on par for the median household income of the entire Calhoun and Berry County PUMA, and then all of a sudden, your median household income started to spike. And first third of the year in 2017, you surpassed Michigan. And then by the end of 2018, you literally have surpassed all of those kind of average household incomes for the area. So you are a community that is seeing growing affluence. Now, we're not talking about affluence at a level that is, an ultra exclusive and elite economy, but we are talking about, a growth in wealth and a growth in investment. And we're seeing those numbers also mimicked in this next, which shows what we call the rent versus own proportion. And what you've seen is in that same time period, you've seen your entire dynamics of home ownership versus home rental start to change. And that very much plays into the stories that we've heard where the community has been seeing sometimes 80 or 90 new homes come online each year. So you're starting to see that growth in home ownership and that kind of changing percentage of rent to own. Now, this is where the numbers got really, really interesting to me. This is looking at the number of jobs that exist in the community. We had that phrase bedroom community. Well, where does that come from? Bedroom community infers that everybody that lives here leaves all day and goes to work somewhere else. Well, you have 1,550 people that leave the community every single day to go to work, but you have nearly 2,200 people who come into the community every day to go to work. So you say that you are a bedroom community when in actuality, you are a job importer. You import more jobs than you lose. And that is a surplus. Now, we wanted to dig into that number a little bit deeper. And I think this is very, very interesting. It was interesting to me, and I think it was confirming to most of you. And let me see if I can kind of explain this. We're getting a little complex with our charts, right? So what we see here is these are called radar charts. And what they do is they literally coincide with our cardinal directions. And the larger the piece of pie, the more employees come from that direction. The darker the color, the closer they are to you. So what this shows us is where the employees that come to Middleville come from. Your overwhelming kind of category and direction is towards Hastings. So you are pulling more employees from Hastings than you are from anywhere else. And then you are pulling kind of second, you're pulling from due east, but you're pulling those people from much farther, where this is your Grand Rapids Metro kind of coming in third. Now look at how this compares to where your residents drive to go to work. Almost all are going northwest and north, and almost all of them are driving in that 10 to 24 mile range to get to work. So you are a home for people working in the Grand Rapids Metro, and you are a job center for people surrounding you with a special focus in kind of a southeastern direction. So again, that helps us to kind of understand where we communicate to and what kind of messages we want to carry to those different directions. And I think that this insight just really helps us to understand a little bit more about how the overall market works. Now, from there, a couple other things just kind of confirming this. This data confirms average commute time for the residents is 21.3 minutes. So what you're seeing here is the orange is your commute times and the gray is the national average. So you are beating the national average in that middle range of 20 to 35 minutes. And then you also have this weird little blip in a 45-minute range. And then everything else, you're kind of keeping people a little closer to home. So that's all in all, I think that works out really well for you. This confirms that average household incomes. You are absolutely beating the norm in this kind of mid-range. Now you're missing the ultra affluent over here on this category, but you also are missing the ultra poor on this category. So it's an interesting dynamic. You have a very, very stable economic distribution that seems to very much reinforce this idea that we kept hearing about this small town. You know, these are what we expect to see in some of those small town dynamics. And then finally, I think this is finally, I always like to look a little bit at the job makeup in the area. What we're seeing here is we're seeing a graphic representation of the employment by occupation and the employment by industry. So the larger the box, the more your percentage makes that up. So the largest kind of sector of your employees are office and administrative support occupations. And then, from there, you're seeing a decent number of management, business and financial operations, healthcare is big, construction is big, and production, manufacturing. Largest overall sector is manufacturing, followed by healthcare and social assistance, and then followed up by retail trade. So this just kind of helps us again to understand what are we looking at, and kind of have all these recommendations based in a certain amount of reality. So that brings me to this realization that you are so much more than a bedroom community. You are our living room community. You are a dining room community. You are a home office community, and you are absolutely a backyard community. And those attributes and those different facets of your story are extremely important for us to build into this overall story that we're trying to tell for Middleville. And that carries us over into our brand toolkit. So with the brand toolkit, what we always like to do is we like to build this up out of 4 primary components. The first is looking at our colors. We're going to make some recommendations on a color palette that we feel like is going to be connective and going to make sense for the community. From there, we're going to make some recommendations on your typeface selection, using typeface as a connective tissue throughout your communication. Then we're going to show you a little bit about our approach to graphics, and then we're going to share with you a strategy on messaging. And so let's start with the fun stuff. Let's start with color. Color is really, really interesting. I think that what you all have done in your community is you have a very, very strong attachment to TK and to the orange. And then you also have a very, very strong implementation from the village standpoint of a burgundy. But when you start to look at the things that kind of exist, you got the village that's kind of using a burgundy and black. You've got the DDA, which is using a kind of a Kelly green and a royal blue and an orange and a gray. Then you've got TK that's got an orange and a black. And then you've got little things like, Thornapple Trail and that kind of stuff that's using almost like a brown and a blue tone. So this is not necessarily a connected color palette. Right? This is everybody is kind of doing their own thing. And what we want to do is we want to see if we can create some energy and connection between those. The two that we really felt like were immovable forces, obviously the orange from TK, and we wanted to really kind of confirm and kind of reinforce this idea of a rich, dark burgundy on the village side, because it had been implemented in so many physical things in your community. So we kind of started with that deep burgundy and that orange, and then we simply built that palette out with colors that were connected and kind of fit together along a sequence. We knew with you having Thornapple River running straight through the community, with having so many different stories about trails and outdoor recreation, we wanted to bring some blues and greens into that. And we wanted to give a smooth transition from that kind of red, that orange of TK into this color palette. So it landed us on this 7 color palette with this deep, nice, kind of rich red burgundy as kind of the dark base. And again, these are really just kind of based off what you've already been using, but creating a system that will allow all those things to feel like they're stitched together. We wanted it to feel vibrant. We wanted it to have some energy to it, but we also wanted to be restrained enough that it wasn't like super busy. And you'll kind of see how that comes together. So, you go from there to there, and I think that it feels like a pretty logical move forward. And then that carries us over into our typeface. Now, one of the things when you're selecting a typeface, I'll tell you, the way that most people kind of approach this is we're an attractive community, and therefore we're going to try to pick a pretty typeface, or we're a historic community, so let's pick papyrus because that looks old. The thing that you have to think about is you have to think about your name. And one of the interesting things about Middleville is Middleville, first of all, you have a lot of letters in your name, and you have a lot of verticals in your name. If you look at both the lowercase and the uppercase and look at how many verticals there are in your name, it actually can make your name a little bit harder to read. So once again, as is kind of my tendency, I went back to history and started to look at historic documents and started to look at how have people conveyed Middleville in the past. And I found a couple really, really interesting historic postcards and maps. And this is one of Thornapple Knitting Company. And you can kind of see this is kind of an interesting a script style typeface, but not overly ornate. And then from there, we even looked at this old photo looking over the bridge with this really, really interesting hand lettered typeface across the top. And that led me to decide to use a script. I felt like being able to have a little bit of a slant on the letters and being able to present the name in a very kind of formal, but very approachable, very kind of down to earth way. And so I started to look at typefaces, and these are the two typefaces that I landed on. I landed on what feels like a hand lettered primary typeface, and you'll see how Middleville looks in that in just a moment. And then to go along with that, I wanted to pick a sans serif secondary typeface. And when I was in school, I learned that sans serif means it doesn't have doohickeys on it. That apparently is the technical term, is it doesn't have doohickeys. But the nice thing about sans serif typefaces is I think a lot of times people feel like they maybe look a little sterile. They're actually designed to be content neutral. And what that means is they don't carry a tremendous amount of personality with them, allowing whatever you're trying to communicate to really shine. So when we dig a little deeper, this is what your name looks like in that typeface. And it keeps the letters in a really, really nice tight field. That's good for legibility. It doesn't have a whole lot of a lot of times in a cursive or a script, when you write an L, it creates an opening in the L. I wanted to make sure that we had one that was closed so that it was a little easier to read. And one of the things that's particularly interesting about this typeface is it has multiple different letter variations to be able to use depending on what you're trying to do, and being able to kind of maximize the look and the feel for the overall design of the composition you're working on. Now, I want to stop here for a second because I do want to point out, oftentimes I avoid using script style typefaces because they're not always the most legible. But I think that one of the things that is interesting, and I actually made this decision on purpose for Middleville, it goes back to those survey results. You know, folks were saying, yeah, people don't really know us. They don't really know who we are. I say I'm from Middleville and they don't really know where that is. When you have a script typeface, it causes people to slow down for a moment. It causes them to slow their eyes and put the energy in to read. And that is a very, very important distinction. So we're actually employing a little bit of this mindset that, hey, we want to look and feel that causes people to slow down and take us in. And the nice thing is, because of the visual nature of this, once they see it a couple of times, it will start to register and it'll just really flow. And I think that's what's nice about using something like this. So then that carries us into our graphics, and that opens up kind of the big question. I could tell from the moment I stepped out of the car in Middleville, we're going to have a problem in this community if I suggest that we remove the stagecoach. Um, I've been doing this long enough. I know how this goes. The stagecoach is everywhere. And you all have done a phenomenal job with implementing that. I mean, it is literally, when I say cast in metal, it is cast in metal. It is in the supports of your benches. It is, in signage. It is everywhere. So the idea that we would be replacing that just makes no sense. You can't justify it. Now, one of the things that I really loved learning about is I loved learning about the good intent line. I loved learning about, how you got your name, Middleville. It's an interesting perspective because the phrase middle of nowhere was used often as we were talking over the past couple of days. People were described this as being the middle of nowhere, or other people would say you're in the middle of nowhere. But the other side of that is you're in the middle of it all. You're so remarkably close to so many things. And that is the thing that really gave you your name, was your convenience to so many places. And I think that that's a really, really important message for us to kind of carry forward with us. So with the graphic approach, the first thing that I wanted to do was just kind of tackle the stagecoach itself. Obviously, this is an image that is reinforced because you actually have a stagecoach that exists in your community, and that's good. So what I did, if you see the screen, the left-hand side is the version that you're using now. It's a little bit different in different places based off where it's used. I'm kind of guessing that it maybe gets recreated every couple of years because somebody knows they need the stagecoach, but maybe doesn't have access to what they need. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a super, super clean, crisp version in what we call a vector format. So I drew the one from on the right. I created a couple of kind of streamlined lines into it so that as it scales, it still has a little bit of movement, has a little bit of kind of momentum to it. If this kind of thing is interesting to you at all, I think that you cannot do any kind of design recommendation related to a stagecoach without knowing what Wells Fargo has done. Wells Fargo probably is the most famous stagecoach logo around, and you can quickly kind of go through and see some of their iterations. But I think that having this clean, simple version is going to be very beneficial to us moving forward. Now, the other thing that I thought was particularly interesting from a graphic approach was, there's certain things about a stagecoach that are just, they're very visual. And the wheel, the idea of the hub and spokes, the idea of you being in the center and all of these things radiating out, this kind of interesting dynamic of a wagon wheel where it almost doesn't look like it should work. The supports don't really look strong enough to hold all that weight, yet it works. And I think there's so much about that was very, very symbolic of the community. And you'll kind of see how that pulled together with my recommendations. And then the final thing that really kind of drew inspiration was just this amazing sense of community. The phrase small town was uttered over and over and over again. You love being small, you love knowing one another, and you also love helping one another. And just this idea of teamwork and everybody being in it together. And I cannot tell you how many times in both the focus groups and in the survey, people were so quick to say, in Middleville, if you are in need, the community comes to your help. Like, we are here for you. And we just heard story after story of that. So those were the things that kind of combined together to kind of lead into my graphic inspiration. And I'll show you how all that comes together in just a second. But before we go there, I want to talk to you a little bit about message. So with the message, there were so many things that seemed to keep coming up. So we've got the small town. It's where you know your neighbor, you support your community, and help is there when you need it. You're this hub. You're the middle of it all. you're focused. You are a family-friendly community, and you are supporters of education and one another. And you are connected. You're connected to nature. You're connected to one another. So those are those themes that really keep emerging. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to take those and I wanted to create a little bit of what we call a brand statement. So I'm going to read this to you in my best dramatic voice. So for nearly 200 years, people have found themselves in Middleville, located along the Stagecoach line, connecting Grand Rapids with Battle Creek and Kalamazoo. Middleville was a bustling place, known to many throughout the Midwest. They came here to get somewhere. We were known for comfort, we were known for warmth, and we were known for good intent. Our community is a place people come on purpose now, to raise a family, to learn and grow, to start a career, to build a business, to feel connected, to escape. You come here to get somewhere. In this amazing place we call home, we live all the best of small town life, where we know the true benefit of being close to everything and far from ordinary. Welcome home to Middleville, Michigan. Well-rounded, perfectly centered. So what you see here is you see this kind of combination of that idea of this wagon wheel, but also bringing it together into this kind of idea of being well-rounded, being centered on growing together as a community and growing our neighbors and teaching them and guiding them. With a system like this, it kind of leads us into this community brand, where the thing that I really love about this icon is from a community standpoint, you kind of have this kind of multifaceted star that really is kind of radiating from the center of this hub. You've got these blues and greens that surround it, but then you also have an adaptation of this that is more people focused. And it's those hands coming in together. It's those people that are putting themselves in the middle to create that strength and be able to team up together. And this idea of meet me in the middle, this is that means coming together for a solution, and I really, really love the duality of that. The star symbolizing that energy and place, and the hands organizing and the people, the people in the organizations. So what you start to see how this system can kind of work. With that simple round icon, it becomes infinitely expandable and infinitely usable. Anytime you got a word that's got an O in it, bam, you can brand that word. You can own it by taking your graphic and putting it right there in the middle. So we start to look at the different dynamics. Does it work in one color? Does it work in reverse? Does it work in black and white? Creating versions that are kind of reversed out on dark colors, on light colors. You can imagine that this can simplify down, and you can use this in an embroidery. You can use this in screen printing. But then being able to look at how does this system, so this is kind of the community brand. This is the thing that everybody shares. How does it translate and make its way over into our organizations? And as you know, this is kind of a co-branding exercise between the village and the DDA. So how does this system relate to both of those? Well, with the village, they've been the ones that have truly been flying this flag of the Stagecoach. So what we want to do there is we want to really incorporate the colors and typeface into a nice, fresh, buildup of that village logo that still keeps that Stagecoach from a traditional standpoint, almost creating a bit of a village seal in this kind of nice, non-traditional form, where it almost feels a little bit more like what would have been a door badge on a Stagecoach instead of this kind of typical circle. But then you also see we've introduced this half circle above the village as a little bit cleaner, more contemporary version as well. this to me feels almost reminiscent of an old half light window above a front door in an old house. And this idea of this kind of connection to history and home, but still giving this kind of idea of energy and dawn and new day, and all of those things I think make sense from the village as an organization. And then just showing how you can go through, and there are a lot of different ways you can adapt this with different department variations, tying it in, having different, sub variations where you might hit on public works or parks and rec or different components like that when you're trying to highlight those. And then that carries us over to the DDA. Now, the DDA is a really, really interesting organization, because I think that DDA is kind of an organizational mechanism, and they have a district that they promote. So, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to highlight the organization side of the DDA. I wanted the DDA to be seen as this engine for vibrancy. This is the group that is helping wheels to turn and helping things to move forward. And this is a way that you can get involved in making the community cool. So leaning on kind of that people-oriented icon, creating that Middleville DDA version, being able to create a stylized downtown version. But I think in a community as small as yours, you are far better versed to promote Middleville as a whole than you are creating a bunch of different subdivisions. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So having it when you need it, but also knowing that you are better served by promoting Middleville as a whole. You can see, in the middle, I'm in the middle of the action, giving this kind of tagline to the organization, and then simply having these very simple graphics that say powered by DDA. I think one of the biggest things that DDAs struggle with across Michigan is nobody knows what they're doing. They're trying to market the district, but then in marketing the district, they oftentimes lose any awareness of what it is that they are doing in the community. So this will give you an opportunity to market Middleville while also getting a little bit of organizational awareness of the things that DDA is doing. Again, simple things like this. Now, all of a sudden, you can truly own the concept of volunteering, and you can kind of position this argument that give time to your community and be part of your community. Like, this is, you are making this place better, and we can all do it if we all put in a little. The thing that I really love about it is just the endless variations that can come out of this. Because of the simple approach to design, it gives you the opportunity for near endless expansion. So simply going through, and whether you're doing kind of a love local campaign, highlighting the local businesses, or whether you're doing maybe a shop local campaign during February, I mean, who knows, just all these different ways that you can kind of make the system work for you. And then where it really gets fun is when you start to take this foundation of the brand toolkit and apply it to the community's events. So a little caveat, if anybody is involved in any of these events and designed these logos, this is in no way, shape, or form saying that the old logos were bad. This is just trying to show how all of these can be stitched into a cohesive system. A lot of times what ends up happening with our logos is we do everything in a silo. It's all kind of designed in a vacuum. And then what ends up happening is we get this great attendance at events, and people really have a good time at the event, but that doesn't necessarily convert over into positive brand equity for the place. I cannot tell you how many times I've worked in communities where people will say nothing ever happens downtown. Our downtown is dead. And then I'll say, well, there was a festival last weekend. There were 14,000 people here. Oh yeah, that was a ton of fun. That was a ton, but our downtown's dead. So being able to stitch together all of those different elements is really, really important for us. So again, Riverbank Music Series, through your colors, through your typefaces, and this kind of generalized approach to design, you can create these components that feel like they are coming from the same family, while still being able to capture some of the individual personalities of the events. Christmas time in Middleville, you can see this is a little bit of a stylized version of that icon that then kind of turns it into a snowflake and this kind of Christmas star. But again, this idea of being able to own these words and going through and creating that constant expansion is really, really good for your system and building value to it. Heritage Days, I can't tell you how many folks told me about the stagecoach robbery reenactments and how special those are. And it's like, man, I see it every year, and it is still, I mean, it's like I'm 6 years old again. Like, they come down and I'm ready for it. So again, being able to tie all those things together. Now, I did something a little interesting here. I actually went through and I selected kind of an ultra detailed version of the stagecoach here. And this makes sense for Heritage Days. Like, this is the look and feel. This is the history. That's where that texture and that story really, really needs to come in. Middleville market, heard a lot of great stories about the market, being able to create a nice kind of clean, simple system for that, where again, you're using those colors and you're using the typeface to connect the dots. And then once you kind of land on that market system, you can go through and you can have different variations of that over the year. If you do kind of a winter market or a harvest market, you can create those different branded variations as you go through. And you build a lot of value by being able to show that versatility in your brand system. Now, we know that we had to cancel the Woodpecker Festival last year and this year, but always hopeful that we'll be able to see that in 2022. So again, being able to show how the Thornapple Woodpecker Festival might be able to play off of those typefaces. When you're celebrating woodpeckers, and one of the storied woodpeckers in Michigan seems to be the red-headed woodpecker, it's okay to use red instead of burgundy. I think that's the thing that we start to see is once you have this system in place, it's always, you have to know the rules before you break the rules, and it's okay to break the rules with intention. So being able to kind of stitch those stories together. The outdoor movies, I call them movies under the stars, like creating this kind of energy. And again, one of the beautiful things about the simplicity of the system is you start to almost own icons and symbols that are round. And imagine how once you get this system in place and you start to have this certain amount of ownership over the shape round, well, now you can feature dinner plates of food that's offered. You can feed, like, the opportunities are endless because you're leaning on the side of simple to tell this amazing story. Fall Fest, everything doesn't have to be super clean, and it can be a little bit more detailed, knowing that audience and kind of creating those dynamics that'll bring folks in. So, showing what a Fall Fest logo might look like. And then I want to talk a little bit about extension. Now, with the extension, this is where the brand system goes out and starts to do some work in the community. So the first thing was things like business cards. Now, I talked a little bit about DDA earlier. Catherine could have a business card that kind of looks like this, but then you could go through and you could actually create these blank board member cards that have a space for you to hand write the board member's name on it. And I know that Jennifer's here with us with Berry County Chamber. This is a great idea for any organization like this, where you have this opportunity to have a branded business card on behalf of their role of the organization, while still giving this opportunity to give kind of that hand touch of them simply writing their names on it. And then these three on the bottom are what I call impact cards. And I've started designing these several months ago, and I just really love these. Like, you print a big stack of these cards, you give them to your board members, and every time they shop downtown, every time they're working throughout the community, they can just leave one of these behind. And it starts to leave this real impact of, we're here for you. We're supporting you every day. So that's something kind of interesting that you all can think about and play with. Now, this next slide shows what I call guerrilla wayfinding signage. Middleville has some beautiful wayfinding signs. as you imagine, they've got the stagecoach up top there, saw quite a few through town. But what these are intended for is these are really focused on our pedestrians and on our cyclists. And this is the way to maximize the economic impact of our walkers and our bikers. This is the way to get somebody who might be drawn here for the Thornapple Trail, and we're spilling them out into downtown. So this is a great way to support our businesses. These kinds of signs came out of a graduate student at NC State, and he went and he created these signs and he hung them up throughout the city of Raleigh-Durham in the dark of night. And they looked so good that everybody in the city of Raleigh assumed that somebody else in the city of Raleigh had approved them. And they were up for months before the community found out that they weren't authorized. And then as soon as they took them down, the community was up in arms because they loved the way that these simple signs gave them an opportunity to feel more connected and kind of create this sensation of exploration in their community. So these can be designed and created on perforated plastic. They can actually, you can do these super cheap. You can use plastic wire ties and put them up on pre-existing poles. And this can literally be a $100 project instead of a multi-$1,000 per sign project like wayfinding is. That's what I love about the guerrilla wayfinding. So then from there, I wanted to show some designs of street banners that you might consider. I think one of the big things that we have, obviously, is we have the entire treatment along the Main Street corridor. As you are traveling M37, you have the electronic sign that tells you to turn, but you also have this interesting section of West Main Street. And I think this is one of the things that really kind of threw me a little bit for the loop about the community is West Main Street and East Main Street are divided at the river. But the way that most people think about the way that communities work these days, they would have thought that West Main Street and East Main Street would break at M37. So you have this short section of West Main Street between M37 and the bridge. So this is kind of that visual corridor that you might drive past and never know that you're passing something special. Having some sort of really impactful banners that lead down that corridor, possibly having something truly visual and impactful along the bridge. And you see these designs tend to be a little bit cleaner. They tend to be, one color screen print and trying to make it nice and easy to be able to get these produced. So you're simply doing a colored canvas with a one color screen print. Now, in addition to that, some folks asked some questions about where this might be the kind of banner that you see, say, along M37 or along Main Street. How do we get people to kind of explore some of the side streets and some of the other nodes? And you might do that through a series of slightly more complicated banners that use these kind of changing solid color tops so that you can have a whole corridor of blue, and then the next corridor is green. And then it helps people to understand, hey, there are things I need to see going down this side street. So being able to use these in a very strategic way, I think is a good way to tackle a banner program from a strategic standpoint. Now, I'm a big fan of merchandise. I think it's really important for us to have things that people want to wear. So making the brand available to your businesses so they can create products, creating things that folks want to wear, and being able to have as varied a look and feel as you would, people's fashion styles. Like this is the way that you allow people to connect with the place. And we really always want our businesses to profit from it. You should be able to profit off of that connection people have with Middleville. And then that carries us into this final implementation stage. I think one of the big things that I feel like is so important for us to talk about is I've showed a lot of different ideas, showed a lot of different graphics. Well, how do we do it? And having been working with communities for almost 20 years, we have created a pretty turnkey approach to implementation, where we've literally put everything that we've ever thought about implementing on one page. We've broken them down into phases that seem logical and allow the community to go through and kind of see in this single page, these are the things we need to think about. This is how we need to integrate this into our long-term planning. And this is how we can start to use this brand for our benefit, literally starting tomorrow. And then from there, we also create a how to be a brand partner page. This is intended for our other community organizations, for our businesses, and for our event organizers. Simply giving them suggestions and creative ways that they might be able to take advantage of the brand system to be able to make their jobs easier, and also to increase awareness and kind of preserve the character of Middleville. And then finally, we also are going to share with both the village and the DDA what we call brand score. And we've actually created a self-scoring mechanism, one for more of a downtown oriented organization, and the other is more for cities and villages. And it allows them to self-score their own implementation, identify the low-hanging fruit of what makes sense for them to focus on next, and be able to kind of track their implementation progress. So with that, we are able to kind of create a rollout strategy and be able to provide those tools to help the community make their personality work for them. In addition to this, once we kind of go through the process of hearing your thoughts and garnering our feedback and our refinements and move towards a completed brand package, we'll be creating a brand style guide document. And that style guide will tell you how to use this, what the typefaces are, what the colors are, how not to use it, make it really, really simple. And then every single logo that we created, we will save in 5 different file formats, and we'll make them all available to the community for them to be able to take and use as they start to enhance that connection between the people of Middleville and this amazing, personality of place that you all have. So it is, man, 4:58. I said I was going to try to do it by 5 o'clock. So that's what I was able to do since yesterday. I would love to stop the screen share for a second and just hear what you all's thoughts are.